we're excited to have you all here. This is the beginning of our community panel for the day. My name's Christian Luna. I'm one of the management team for the Asian Mental Health Collective, and I am also co-founder of this group called Waves. Community has always been a big thing for me, so yeah, without friends and family kind of helping me along the way, I'm honest to say, probably wouldn't be here right now. So it's just a super important thing to me, just kind of building those connections and being able to build those networks for those who may not have them. So, and I think the group will surely attest to that today as we just touch on that importance of community, especially in the Asian space and hopefully more so in the mental health space. So with that, yeah, we have this wonderful group of panelists from across different organizations, across a lot of the world, and just representing different groups. So with that, I'll pass it around for introductions. And again, my name's Christian. I use he, his, him pronouns, Filipino, and I am second generation. I believe that's how it is. I always forget this. But yeah, and I help with AMHC. And I'll pass it off to my lovely co-moderator, Lisa.
Hey everyone, my name is Lisa. I use she, her pronouns. Just like Christian, on the management team for the Asian Mental Health Collective. I'm so grateful and excited to be here and grateful for you all who are tuning in. And we are about to hear amazing things from our wonderful panelists, as Christian said, from around the world, from across different organizations and different specialties. At the Asian Mental Health Collective, I am the Director of Human Resources, which is really just fancy for working with volunteers, which is one of my greatest passions. So I just want to shout out the volunteers for the Transformation Conference one more time. Thank you all so much for all of your hard work. I love you all. Thanks again. And without further ado, I'd like to pass it off to our panelists and hear a little bit more about their background and their interests.
Cool. Yeah, and why don't we start with Sharon, just going round robin on my screen.
Hi everyone, my name is Sharon Kim. I use the pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm a Korean, ethnically Korean. I grew up as a third culture kid in 3 different continents. I work at an organization called Master C Generation, where we spark the dialogue around mental health in the Korean American community.
Thanks, Sharon. Dan.
Hi, y'all. My name is Daniel Tan. Tan is pronounced Tang in Teochew. So shout out to Gaki Nang out there. My pronouns are he, him, his. The son of Khmer genocide refugees. I'm from Philly and currently in Brooklyn. Licensed clinical social worker in community mental health, working with young adults and adolescents experiencing what the medical model would call first episode psychosis. Also do a lot of work in the community with providing therapy for people with oppressed identities, mainly a lot of Asian Americans who have really been looking for me and others like me in the past year, as I'm sure many of you all know. Also do other types of community work, including consulting on anti-racist work, and also work with the New York Coalition for Asian American Mental Health, whom I'm representing today as one of the co-chairs of the professional development group, where we're trying to support other Asian American mental health professionals and the mental health of Asian Americans throughout New York City.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Dan. Erlinda.
Hi, everyone. My name is Erlinda de la Cruz. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a Filipina, second generation American, grew up in the Southwest, but I am now in New Jersey. I'm a campus advisor with the JED Foundation. I work with colleges and universities across the United States to help them make systemic change to create a culture of care on their campus in hopes of preventing suicide in teens and young adults. Thank you for having me.
For sure. Thank you, Erlinda. Yuna.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yuna Yoon. I use the pronouns she, her. I am a licensed clinical social worker. I grew up in New York, and as Erlinda, I currently live in New Jersey. I'm an assistant director at Korean Community Services, and alongside Dan, I volunteer and I'm co-chair with the New York Coalition for Asian American Mental Health, and I'm so glad to be here with y'all.
Awesome, thank you. Alex.
Hi everyone, I'm Alex. I'm Filipino Canadian. And I'm here primarily to talk about my role as a youth mental health advocate with an organization called Jack.org, which is dedicated to revolutionizing youth mental health here in Canada. On the side, I also volunteer as social media manager for Asian Mental Health Collective. And I also work for Kickstand, an organization that is bringing the integrated youth care model to Alberta, Canada. Yeah, thanks.
Great. Crystal?
Hello, everyone. My name is Crystal Canary. My pronouns are she, her. I'm 29 years old, Filipino-American second generation. My parents being immigrants from the Philippines in Bataan and San Marcelino, Zambales. And I'm a settler of stolen lands in the Piscataway lands, what is known as Waldorf, Maryland. Today, I am representing actually myself, a person who does not know what they wanted to be after college, but have since really represented and served the Asian American Pacific Islander community at a national level in various national nonprofit organizations focusing on mental health advocacy. So to answer the question of who is my community, I'd rather treat that as an action verb. I'm in community with people where I feel safe and embraced and uplifted to be in speak in my truth. And I'm in community with those whose actions and our intentions are to do the same. And so that said, I'm happy to be in community with you all today because I know Asian Mental Health Collective and everyone here are really here to speak on about themselves and how to heal as a community and to heal themselves and their loved ones. So thank you again for having me today.
Thanks for being here, Crystal. Super appreciated. And lastly, Amy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amy. I'm currently based in Toronto. Pronouns are she, her. I am Chinese Canadian. And I work at Jack.org, which Alex already introduced. But basically, we're a Canadian charity that focuses on training and empowering young people to revolutionize youth mental health. And I work there as a program coordinator. So I primarily work with youth in our chapters and talks programs.
Okay, great. So yeah, as you can test, like we have quite a group. I'm super honored, humbled to have everyone on this call, just with such different backgrounds. And yeah, I think kind of want to dive into it in the meat of it. And I guess one of the things that obviously is huge forefront to this conversation is the notion of Asian and mental health. That's just the focus of today's whole conference, but I think kind of breaking that down a bit, especially when it comes to the notions of community, I think that's a really big one. And yeah, I think kind of want to reach out to the panelists to break that down a little bit. What does it really mean to be Asian? And then going a bit into what does it mean to be in a mental health community? Two different questions that kind of conjoin and have different meanings in and of themselves. So with that, Orlinda, we had some chats previously as we were leading up to the conference, and you mentioned this theme that the words and verbiage of it never occurred to me, but it really struck me as an interesting and very fruitful way of something I've always thought about, the Asian monolith, how we're always lumped together on census forms and everything is like, oh, checkbox, you're Asian, but there's so many different varieties and so many different cultures and ethnicities that, yeah, like as a Filipino, it definitely doesn't quite have that same resonance as it does sometimes for me. But yeah, I would wondering if you be able to speak more to that and why there is a bit of a myth to it that Asian is just one kind of term, one monolith.
Absolutely. I think, like you said before, it really is down to the census, but looking at the people we have today, we're not a monolith. We have different languages, different religions, different cultures, different regions, and some in our community don't even have geographical regions anymore because of history, because of colonization and whatnot. So I think in the sense of community, one of the things that I really like after listening to the socio-cultural panel is one of the things that no matter really what culture in Asia we really think of, but there is this sense of collectivism. There is this sense of we will be with each other, we will look out for one another. And I think that is one of the more beautiful things about being Asian is that we will claim each other, we will look out for each other, just because that is something we're taught, right? Like we're taught to look out for our siblings, our family. And I think because we are children of immigrants, we are generationally children of immigrants, like that is something we've always looked and really abide by, is really looking for the people who are really around you and really finding your community. And I think in this Asian community collective, that the thing that I like about it is it does include everyone, right? Sometimes when we hear Asians, sometimes everyone's first inkling is East Asians. Like, you don't include Southeast Asians, you don't include Desi folks, and I think, or South Asian folks. So I think I really appreciate that when you all were looking for panelists, it really was inclusive of everyone as much as possible. And I think that's kind of the next step is claiming outside of our ethnic bounds, is claiming each other, especially in this space alone, and really trying to figure out, like, what does that mean for us as a community who are made up of so many different parts, so many different backgrounds and histories, right? That we are still willing to claim each other and still willing to look out for each other.
Yeah, that's definitely an awesome take on it. I think that ethos of just, even though we all have our own different cultures, our own background, there still is that shared communal value of just being collectivists and watching out for each other, and that importance of family and community. I think that's definitely something that we'll want to keep at core as we go through the questions and topics, and kind of how that is important in kind of just raising our communities and working together to grow as a people and a collective. So with that in mind, taking it to the other side of the construct of Asian mental health, there's also the aspect of mental health communities. And this is something that I hadn't really too much considered either going into the conference, but it is something in and of itself that is a community. So a little bit of my background, back when I was living in New York, me and one of my good buddies, shout out to Eric, we founded this group known as Waves. And side note, Waves doesn't stand for anything, but it's just a fun word. It's eroding away the toxic parts of mental health one bit at a time. But we were very big on just kind of having a space where people can walk in and everybody just knows that, yeah, mental health is a thing. Everyone's gone through problems, troubles. We all have mental health. It's like physical health. We need to all make sure we maintain it as well as we possibly can. But yeah, I think there are still aspects of it that even within the mental health communities, there are those who are still destigmatized by even those who do feel inclined to share and destigmatize. But yeah, no, there were definitely some mentions of this in our group chats earlier this week and in times and planning. And I was wondering if Dan, if I know that you touched on it a lot, and a lot of other folks, but I wonder if you can kind of start us off thinking about those aspects of ableism and ageism, sexism, racism, those other dimensions.
Yeah, thanks for asking me this huge question. That's probably a whole nother conference, right? So, I really appreciate the sociocultural panel earlier, because a lot of what they said is really applicable to Asian mental health. And we need to turn what they said into intentional action on undoing oppression. Because while I think collectivism is something that a lot of us were raised around, there's a lot of forces that are pushing us against one another. And a lot of that has to do with what we think about power. And so all those isms have a lot to do with identities that are either oppressed or privileged, and powerful systems based on institutions, laws, and beliefs fuel that oppression. So what we need to think about is community uplifting, and to intentionally break down those power structures that I just mentioned that would cause all those isms. So for example, we need Asians to undo what they've internalized as standards of success and wellness from a American perspective dominated by white culture, and get rid of the notion that healthiness, for example, is a normality, and stop the assumption that humanity is about perfection rather than what it actually is, that has so much breadth. So in practical ways, we need leadership to change, right? So we need trans women of color in charge. We need people living with voices in leadership. We need more refugees and children of refugees in leadership to really help create policies and organizations that undo all that toxic internalized beliefs, and we need a lot of solidarity, right? So that means being able to challenge policies that exist too, so that there's both a micro and a macro. And for the mental health professionals out there, we want to be part of the answer, so that we're not just helping the survivors of trauma, but creating means to thrive and crafting that path for the people we work with, whether they're our clients or our colleagues, to do the same. And a big part of it is this idea that we want to learn from history. So think about our present circumstances and also imagine and work towards a future with the intention of ending all the trauma, generational pain, systemic oppression. And we need to fundamentally shift how we do things. And that, I think, is really what mental health from a community perspective is about, so that we can fundamentally create a change in the way things work.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that, Dan. I mean, that definitely is a strong concept that I need to deal with. There are certain things ingrained in the system that, as much as we want to do in the here and now, if it's a Band-Aid on a lot of these issues. Like, there are things that are at the core that are deep seated that need to be addressed before we can ever I was going to reach out to you, Chris, but but yeah, no, but I do think you have a lot of insight in, like, working across like so many different dimensions. Like, I think there's a lot you have to say, like, in terms of kind of what the system is and like what are some of those difficulties. Don't mean to put you on the spot now, but yeah, like, I'd love to like hear what your thoughts are on that, just because, yeah, from our pre-panel prep, like, there was so much insight, I think, just from working so many dimensions that I think community would love to hear.
Yeah, I'd love to share a bit more. I know Daniel said so much, and just wanted to add a bit that, to really address the isms, you really need to confront those undercurrents of really calling it what it is. Call it ageism, call it ableism, call it sexism, racism, and not be afraid to really create that climate of intolerance, from being a person that is not just being a bystander, but being an upstander and having those difficult conversations, similar to what's been said already in the social cultural panel. The Tatlong Bagsak training really helped me learn more about that. Another thing that I'm seeing is really trying to make and offer a safe refuge for authentic discussions and dialogue. Growing up, at least speaking for myself, I was taught to really listen and learn, and try to do what I could to get a good job, to be a good student. And what Daniel was mentioning earlier is really normalizing, really talking about one's emotions, and having a better emotional intelligence, rather than just academic intelligence. I could say that's something that many that I work with it, whether that be at a national level or a local level, have really tried to foster within their families, within their communities. And I think beyond that, I would say it starts with really seeking ways in which we are seeking leadership, right? Neil mentioned uh, working in spaces that advocate for mental health. In this resource list that we're going to share with you, have many resources for national nonprofit agencies. And after working as part of it, realize not many of the people working there look like us. And so how do we learn to be mental health advocates and work in these professional spaces so that our stories are heard? That's one thing, really engaging and becoming a part of that behavioral workforce, really being a part of that national behavioral health agenda that is being spoken about on Capitol Hill. Those are so many different ways in which we can really talk about our mental health outside of our communities.
Yeah, Crystal, I really appreciate you sharing out, especially your expertise on that as well. I think that the big question that a lot of transformation is devoted to is like, what does Asian mental health mean? And how can we address it in a community manner? Dan and Crystal, I know we've spoken about this many a time in our previous meetings, but I was wondering if you could speak to a little bit about what is Asian mental health and why does it matter for our community to be engaged with that?
I don't want to necessarily go first in case I say everything, but no, okay. There's a couple of things I think about with this question, right? Like, and this might kind of like hit on some of the other things that we might talk about later. But first, is this idea of what does it mean to be Asian American, and what is mental health, right? So we already talked about how it's not just a monolith. And the New York Coalition for Asian American Mental Health, we did a workshop a couple of years ago about what does it mean to be an Asian American mental health professional. And there was this activity that we did about who I am versus who am I not. And I did one in a group with someone named Erica. Shout out if you're watching this. And what was stated was, I'm also an artist, not me. But the community has artists, dancers, poets, lawyers, grocery store workers, farmers, stay-at-home parents, right? And so we want to think about who we are to make sure that there's like a breadth in the community, right? So when we think about what does it mean to be Asian American, we can't think in this monolith perspective. So for my Chinese side, if you look at the statistics, we're wealthier. For the Cambodian side, we're so poor in America. And so we have to think about how community has been defined by others in addition to ourselves. So what do I want for my community? What will make my community proud? And what do I want from my community? So that Asian American means that kind of distinct area between white America and our family of origins culture, and trying to hold that space and make it our home, and still trying to figure that out. And so when you think about that, we want to think about mental health and what stigma means, and reconceptualizing a little bit. So we look at health-seeking behaviors, shame, oppression, right? And where individuality and collectivism can kind of fit, right? So if you think about even in the US, statistics show that 2/3 of the Asian American community are more like my parents. They're foreign born, right? And then if you look at New York City, a couple years ago, the New York City Poverty Rate Index said that Asian Americans were the poorest. And so we need to think about mental health as also housing, ending poverty, all those socioeconomic issues that really inform mental health. So what I'm here to say is that we don't want this single narrative about Asian mental health being about poor mental health service utilization and saying that Asians don't care about mental health. Because it's not just about being able to talk about our own feelings. It's about expression of humanity in multiple ways, and taking kind of like a middle path of sorts. Communities around the world, for example, have healed in different ways for years. In many ways, we've kind of borrowed it to an industry under our capitalistic employer-based insurance provided mental health care. So we just want to make sure that while the language is not centered on this concept called mental health, part of the work is to identify what it is our Asian communities do that promote mental health, and be proud of that. In addition to, for Asian Americans like myself, this kind of distinct and beautiful overlap of multiple cultures really coming together to promote mental health in a way that promotes community and individual wellness of mind, body, and spirit.
That was wonderful, Daniel. Thank you. Crystal, did you want to add anything onto that?
Yeah, I want to uplift NAPIMA. Dr. Ida spoke at the last session. NAPIMA is the National Asian American Pacific Islander Mental Health Association, and they have a program called Achieving Whole Health. Achieving Whole Health is a training that teaches community organizations about just what Daniel said, mind, body, and spirit, how mental health in Asian cultures is really rooted in not just the mind, but the body, the spirit, how you are feeding yourself, whether that be feeding yourself food, whether you're feeding yourself physical things such as exercise and sleep, how that's connected to then your mind and your sense of spirit, how you're connected to one another. And I just want to uplift them, because they have been an organization that has been training community organizations from across the country for many years. And so if you are interested in learning more about that organization, they're doing online trainings now rather than in person. And so really looking to that those different ways of addressing mental health in the community in an evidence-based community defined way versus these Western mental health practices that we often see through therapy, for example.
Thank you, Crystal. For the sake of time, I'm going to move us on to our next section. This is devoted to how we reach our communities. And so for folks in this part of the panel, we would love to hear a little bit more about what you do specifically in your organization to reach your targeted populations. And one of the things that we discussed previously was kind of like age groups and like how mental health, Asian mental health is discussed and perceived very differently from our younger generations all the way up to our older generations. And so Sharon and Yuna, I know that we were speaking a little bit about the ways in which you all reach youth and older populations. So I'd love to pass that on to you, starting with Sharon.
Sure, thank you, Lisa. At Mustard Seed Generation, we have 3 groups in our community. We consider Korean American families, so parents and students, as well as church leaders are a huge part of our community. And we also consider local mental health professionals to be part of our community. And when we reach youth or when we reach older generation about mental health and we try to raise awareness about it, we don't just bring them, just specifically them. We try to bring everyone together and build bridges across generations. And so we have parent workshops, we have, middle school and high school workshops. But at the end, what we always do, we always bring them together, because I think there's more healing that happens when they all come together and they're given tools to express what they've been going through. They now understand, all the stressors that happen in immigrant life and immigrant families, and now they have the communication tools to be able to express those to their children or to their parents. And the way we reach them is very specific. We market and target our audience specifically, knowing that they are, there is a lot of stigma on mental health. And so when we reach the older generation, first-gen Koreans who may not see English posters, but they read Korean posters, we try to reach them in a way that says, it's not a mental health conference, right? Because nobody will show up. But instead, what we do is we say, hey, this is about a healing conference where you can improve your relationship with your child, and everyone is interested. All parents are interested in that, right? Yes, I want to improve my relationship with my high school students, right? But when we create the same poster in English, design-wise, it looks identical, but in English, we actually tailor it to our younger generation, and we say, hey, this is about understanding where your parents are coming from, how to bridge that cultural gap. And younger generation are a little more in tune of that, and so they are hooked. They're like, okay, and so bring your parents. If they didn't see the Korean poster, bring your parents, right? And so we try to reach these 2 generations, one first generation and second gen, or 1.5 gen. We try to bring them all under one roof and create a space, a bilingual and bicultural space where both cultures are very much identified, very much appreciated and acknowledged. And so that's what we try to do at Mustard Seed Generation.
Thank you, Sharon. I think what you're speaking to is making sure that the language that we have around mental health should be accessible to the population, right? And so for the older generations who feel a lot more stigma around mental health, I think you are doing a wonderful job with framing, again, like this is about improving relationship with your child and how everyone then shows up and how do you get people to show up to the table? Wonderful, thank you. Yuna, is there anything else that you would like to add on to how you reach different generations around Asian mental health?
Yes. So I actually want to piggyback off of what Sharon was talking about in talking about the importance of language. So we have the dialect itself and the conversation around mental health. So I'm part of a Korean nonprofit, but it is an organization that's been around so long. We have trust in the community. So we've been around since 1973, so we're 48 years old. And the mental health clinic is actually relatively new since 2015. And the reason was that a need was felt. And so you can come in and whether you're in for breast cancer screenings or for meals, you can be referred to mental health services. So directors meet together regularly. And if there's a senior center, and if it's felt that a senior needs more services, we can connect them. And just to also piggyback off of Sharon about the language and the generational and the generational relationships. Because our team has bilingual staff, we can address those things because there's always experience around that. People are constantly specializing in that. And because we're a fully operating state licensed clinic, we can provide the psychotherapy and medication that people need for issues that range across the gamut. So people are coming in for depression, anxiety, bipolar schizophrenia, and just the main thing is that anyone, because it's a community-based organization, anyone with a mental health issue, we believe must be seen. So if you have immigration issues or if you have financial difficulties, we'll still see you. We have a sliding scale fee, and we have an angel fund, which relies on donations and grants from the community.
Thank you, Yuna. I think, again, you speak to this really important piece of, trust, right? Folks in our community will access resources if they feel trust with the organization or if they feel that the community feels trust with the entire topic. So I appreciate that perspective on your end. Speaking to college youth in particular, I know Amy and Erlinda, we were talking a little bit about what it's like to reach college populations. Amy, could you speak a little bit to what you do at your organization?
So at Jack.org, actually, we work with youth aged 15 to 24. So not only those at the college or university level, but also within high school. Just to sort of also piggyback off of some of the conversations we already had earlier, I think a big reason why we started Jack.org and why our charity organization got going in the first place is because we really wanted to give youth a platform where they can speak up about issues that are impacting them, and to really raise awareness around barriers that exist in their respective communities. Originally, our founder, Eric, when he first started the charity, he sort of went around to different, like other organizations and other people interested to talk about mental health. And he also gave quite a few talks to other young people as well. But he was finding that the message just wasn't quite reaching them. And I think one of the reasons why was because a lot of young people, although in certain situations might want to hear from older adults, they actually want to hear from their peers. They want to hear from other people who look like them, who have gone through similar experiences as them, and can understand like some of the issues that they're going through. And that's something that really resonates with me. I know that growing up as a Chinese Canadian in like a neighborhood where there weren't many other Chinese people or Asian people in general, like with some of the hardships I went through with my family and school and other things, like it was really hard to bring up issues around mental health. So when I found Jack.org and I found this community of people that really talk about mental health in a way that's non-judgmental and like really accepting, it meant so much to me. So I think that's why it's so important that for young people, we have those spaces so that they can feel accepted and talk about issues that are impacting them.
Thank you, Amy. I think in peer spaces and for youth especially, I really connect with that. In Subtle Asian Mental Health, our Facebook group, we see a lot of peer-to-peer relationships, and that is, again, especially the way that youth seem to prefer to destigmatize mental health. Erlinda, I know you have a background working with college students, and that is a big part of your passion. Could you speak a little bit more to what you do to help destigmatize mental health for youth?
Absolutely. So kind of similar to Amy, we work with colleges, but we also work with high school students. That's our new pilot program, but kind of similar to what Amy and what we've been talking about and thinking about stigma and thinking about how youth would rather talk to their peers about this. I think that's kind of what we found as well, like making sure that there are spaces for that, making sure that it's encouraged on your campus, that there's staff for it, there's training for it. Because I think especially, right, like we've been talking about stigma this whole time. And I think, right, like as a Filipino, like, right, things are, nakahiya yun, like, right, there's shame around it. And by talking about it, you kind of remove that shame and thinking about how to just being able to talk about it with your peers. I think on the other side of that, in thinking about utilization of resources, because there's this huge shame of it, then people don't want to go to therapy. People don't want to use their insurance. People don't want to have that on their record because it's shameful. So really thinking about how to redefine that and what does that look like, and even thinking about representation in your staff, in your therapist or your counselor staff. Like, is there someone that this student feels like they trust? Is there someone from their community that can understand them, that can feel like they have someone who will understand what they're talking about and understand that stigma behind it? Because I think that's the other part of it, is that when you want to talk to someone about these things, but there's so much shame around it, and if that person, if that therapist, if that counselor, that staff member, whatever it may be, doesn't understand where you're coming from, it's going to deter you even more. So having people who you trust, having that community aspect of it, will allow students to feel comfortable, reduce that shame, and even just want to talk to more people about it. Because I think that's the other part of this, is that the more we don't want to talk about it, the shame increases, right? The more the stigma increases. So the more we talk about it, it'll all decrease. And then the goal is to normalize it so we can use resources, use help, use each other to help through these things.
That was really well put, Erlinda. I think, again, peer-to-peer relationships and normalizing and destigmatizing mental health takes courage, but it also takes trust that's built within the communities as well. I'm going to move us to kind of reaching specific populations again. Sharon and Yuna, I know with having church communities, there is a specific way that you all reach your groups. Yuna, would you like to speak a little bit about what it's like reaching church groups?
Actually, so I actually briefly spoke with Sharon, and so because I know Mustard Seed specializes with faith-based, I'll just give her space for a second and then.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we did talk, Hyuna and I wanted to be very mindful of the fact that we both represent Korean American community, and that we're taking up the space of other groups that could have been represented. So we wanted to be very mindful of that. One of the things that we do is, and as I mentioned in the introduction, the church community is a huge part of who our community is and Mustard Seed Generation, because 71 to 80% of Korean Americans regularly attend the Christian church. And we quickly realized from the very get-go that we didn't want people to come to us and to our organization because that's self-selecting themselves to come, and maybe they're already aware of the importance of mental health. But what we really wanted to do is go to where they were at and meet the most common person, the most lay person ever, the most lay Korean American person ever, who are struggling in their daily, tools and daily struggles. They are not even aware of the impact of mental health in their lives and their families' lives. And so what we wanted to do is really go to them. And the most strategic point we could go to was the church, because 70 to 80% of Koreans collectively gather themselves at the church. And the church acts as not only as a religious place, but as a social, cultural, an educational, political space. We were able to, go to them and create these conferences, and maybe they join, maybe they come to a conference thinking that, oh, it's a conference out of my church, so I'll just go, and then they learn about mental health. And so that's what we wanted to do, and that's why we are so big about including church leaders into our conversations, including them as part of our important stakeholders. But we also know that we cannot do it alone. We are a national organization, and we believe that sustainable change can only happen from when locals take charge. And so what we do in our conferences is we bring in local mental health professionals, Korean American mental health professionals, and we bring them to the conferences, kind of bridging them all together so that church leaders as well as Korean families have a face behind mental health. And then they later on, after we leave, after our event is done, they're able to say, oh, you know what, maybe I can follow up with that person, Jessica Kim or whoever, right? because she stays here, she's a local, she knows my family, we already met. So that's what we really try to do, is bringing them all together, the three families, churches, and local Korean American mental health professionals together, so that there's sustainable change that happens. But we spoke about this, right, very passionately before. But did you want to mention something more?
Yeah, so we had this little deep moment where we're talking, like just as Sharon said, taking up space. And I was just thinking, isn't that such a big thing that's part of the theme for Asian Americans, right? Our ability to take up space in this country. And so for us to just really think about that, and can I quote you, Sharon, on the Korean monolith? So we have the Asian monolith, but then even within Korean, what does it mean to be part of a community, a more like prevalent community, a more marginalized community? What about if you're one of the members who felt like there was a rejection from the community, right? And so one of the great things about having a general overall nonprofit is that there's so many entryways into the clinic, and we collaborate. So actually, I found out that Master Tadida and us, I'm taking up space, but it's not very long actually. We have this annual conference, and then we'll collaborate in that way with a faith-based organization. At the same time, we have a pretty lively associate board. So they come up with different events around amplifying voices. So one of them, and they were this year, one of them was amplifying Black and Korean voices. And the panelists were both people who were half Black, half Korean. And then the second one was amplifying LGBT and Korean voices, which is a topic that has caused a lot of pain and a lot of confusion in the community, but it creates an opportunity for conversation. And in a way, doing so is actually leading to the community building, because what it does is it enables people to kind of reach across the aisle. So.
We also, just like Yuna's organization did that, we also at Mr. Seed recently did, or in May, we did a webinar just on addressing anti-Blackness in the Korean community. We just wanted to bring all the Koreans out there and be like, look, we need to be honest with ourselves and be able to say we are part of the racism that's been happening, the systemic racism that's been happening. And we wanted to create a space where just Koreans could come and be able to recognize that us as a collective, Korean group have been part of this problem. And so we wanted to identify that and talk about what can we do? Why is this? Why are we racist? And what can we do about it? And that was something that just exploded in interest, and because it was touching on a lot of people's interests at that time as well as now. But I think there's power in, yes, everyone collectively calls us Asian, but I think there's also power in coming together as a Korean group or whatever group you're part of, and being able to say, hey, look, let's look at our problems realistically and be able to deal with them, and so that we can go out, understand ourselves first, and then go out to be able to do even bigger things collectively. So
I just want to thank Sharon and Yuna for sharing your insight on reaching church communities, but also talking about really important topics like addressing anti-Blackness in our community. And that kind of leads us really beautifully into our next section of where do we go next, right? We've identified the Asian monolith as a myth. We've identified how we reach mental health communities in our organizations. But where do we go from here, and how do we address those isms that we kind of identified earlier? I will pass it off to Christian, who will be taking care of this section.
Yeah, no, thanks, Lisa. I think a big aspect of it is when it comes to mental health, is especially for those who are younger. My own personal story was that I didn't know I had a mental health disorder until I knew, not to share my mother's story, but I know she's watching, but she had to go through her own traumatic experiences before with her mental health. And that actually set up my family for when they realized that I had something going on to really address it. So without that community support of just my family, I don't know where I would be today. So I'm eternally grateful for them helping me through those times. But yeah, it's something that always makes me think, for those kids out there, even adults, who don't know that they may have something wrong. I mean, that's the thing with mental health. It's your own thoughts. Like, it's so easy to think that you are the problem and you should just really deal with it. And in an Asian society that particularly reinforces that yeah, you need to have that like stalwartness and you need to just push yourself. It's a hard thing to think that you're even disenfranchised or even someone that is suffering from something. So I think with that, Alex, I know you have some thoughts and points on how do we reach out to those groups who just don't know that they may not, that there's help out there that they can seek.
Absolutely. I think it really comes to one, the image that you're putting out there. This era of community organizations with a perfect public image is over, right? Like, in my experience being a young person engaging with an organization, young people or folks who are experiencing oppression or marginalization, they just want you to be straight up, right? And that comes with the practice of anti-oppression. It's not enough to just say, we're not oppressing others. Well, I'm not racist. You have to take the step to be anti-oppressive. You have to take the step to be anti-racist, right? And that looks like being vulnerable on a public level. That looks like sitting with uncertainty. That looks like having bravery. Like Sharon mentioned, like that event that they had where like it was a uncomfortable, conversation, but it was brave and it led to real change, to real conversations. And that is the risk that we have to take as community organizers, as well as, owning up to your mistakes. And then, those folks that are experiencing this oppression and marginalization, when they see that, then, it builds that trust with them. Like, I can put my trust in this organization, in the people that work there, that volunteer here. And that's, how you can start building community with them. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, no, thanks, Alex, for sharing that. I mean, I think that definitely goes back to the points we raised at the beginning of our chat. Yeah, there are frameworks in place that make it super hard to break these things down. There are systems of oppression. And yeah, I know, Crystal and Dan, this is a topic that resonates with you very much so. And yeah, I would love to hear, again, your thoughts on now that we know that they're in place, what do we do to address them? Like, how can we break apart things that are so deeply entrenched in our societies? But yeah.
Yeah, I can start, and I'm making myself laugh right now because I'm going to say "Let's get loud" in the words of J-Lo, because right now I'm thinking about I'm thinking about the places I've worked, and some of them include the National Council for Behavioral Health, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, the National Alliance for Mental Illness. These are all national mental health advocacy organizations, as well as the federal agency that supports the mental health and substance use disorders of our nation, and yet many people do not know about it. And so I'm here to say, let's inform ourselves of those spaces and insert ourselves in them, as well as make our own spaces to talk about Asian mental health, so that we can get those grassroots organizing to the grass tops. I'm very excited for this administration. I, back 4 years ago, was a part of the White House Initiative on Asian American Pacific Islanders E3 program, which was a student ambassador program, and one of the pillars was mental health, where we worked to talk about mental health in colleges and universities. With this administration, really looking forward to similar work being done. And so my ask of the community is, what are we doing to inform that leadership of our needs? How do we insert ourselves in that? There's a National Hill Day that happens every year through the National Council for Behavioral Health, where behavioral health organizations from across the country and mental health advocates go to the Hill to talk to legislators about their experiences. I never see Asian Americans there, and so inserting ourselves in that space. Applying for funding. There are many dollars right now. There was an act just this past week increasing the amount of funding going towards mental health first aid. How many of our organizations are applying to have our communities trained in mental health first aid, which is a training similar to CPR that helps communities learn the signs of just how to help people when they are in crises. And I want to go back to saying, it doesn't always have to be these solutions that are through those those national organizations. It is also rooted in us and our own understanding of our own indigenous roots and our own ways of healing, and how are we uplifting those. I say I'm representing myself today because I want it to be known that there are people that are organizing through Instagram, organizing through just their own communities, with just talking on Zoom with their friends and family now during COVID, especially, to talk about how they're doing. And so I also say that to change this, like, this change doesn't happen in a moment, it happens in a movement. One way of doing so is changing the way we speak about this topic. Instead of saying fine, fine to me is, when people ask, how are you doing? And you say fine, like, that to me is usually like stands for feelings I'm not expressing. And I'd rather change the question and say, how are you feeling? How's your mind, body, spirit? So it allows people to kind of delve deeper into really thinking about other words that they may have that show what's actually going on with them. And so I kind of went into personal and more community, but I think those are some ways for those listeners in the audience of ways where you can really lead from any chair, whether you are a mental health professional, someone that has I don't have a license. I actually am always in like imposter syndrome because of that. But I also have come to tell myself that you don't have to have like a master's degree or a professional license to be a mental health advocate. I've navigated all this through looking at Google and typing up like Asian mental health and looking at the research, looking at the organizations that have been doing this work, and really learning from them and being in community with them. So those are a few ideas.
Yeah, no, Crystal, those are some totally awesome points. I think just in terms of kind of like across the board, how do we kind of move on from here? And speaking of moving on, just in the interest of time, we want to reach out to some of our questions from the audience. And yeah, I think Lisa, I know you have some on cue. Yeah, if you could kick us off on some that we've been receiving.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thank you all for your perspectives. They've been so insightful and helpful to the community. I think we only have time for one question. We have one person who's asking about college students, and for many college students, especially college men, they do not want to seek out help because they don't want their parents to see the session billed on their insurance. And so the question is, how can these men seek help? Erlinda, I feel like this question is something that you can address. I think we've spoken about this before.
Yeah, I read it. I was like trying to prepare a response in my head.
Yes, perfect.
But absolutely. So I think that this question is twofold. So like one, right? So as people of color, as children of immigrants, as folks that this system was not made for, it is always hard to really seek help for us, right? It's not something we're taught. It's not something we were really expected to do. And then especially when you add insurance as already a complicated system that we're also already not taught, it is absolutely difficult. And then when you add the socialization of men, and especially Asian men, who are often in this, in America, who are often demasculated and just expected to do certain things, it makes it even harder. So I think for many college students and college campuses, you can get free counseling. So I would say check that out first, because as many of us, I would say post-grad, use that resource now, because counseling is sometimes expensive afterwards. So use it free now. I think that's one sense. And then the second sense of it too is also understanding what HIPAA laws are, and also understanding what is within your right of seeing what's on your bill, what your parents can see on your bill versus later. HIPAA laws are there to protect your own usage. And so I think that in and of itself is something. And the other part of it too is sometimes, especially for folks of color, especially for men of color, sometimes support groups are probably one of the better spaces for you to find help, to find community help, to find people who really do look like you. And that isn't always something that you need insurance for. That's something that is community spaces, sometimes is on your college campus, sometimes is in this virtual world that they offer support groups. Those are spaces that you can look at that you don't necessarily need to find insurance for, but not saying that you should not use insurance. It's just, informing yourself about it.
Orlando, that was wonderful. For anyone who's tuning in, for anyone who's wondering if they can access therapy through the university, I encourage you all to check that out. And with that, and talking about resources, the Asian Mental Health Collective will be sending out a resource list that all of our wonderful panelists have been contributing to. So the resources that we've spoken about today will be referenced in that document. With that, I want to thank all of our panelists for giving us your wonderful perspectives and insights on Asian mental health, and especially in the community perspective. Thank you all for your time, and enjoy the rest of the Transformation Conference.